They said my barn was an eyesore. That was the word the letter used. Bold font, capital E, like it was some kind of disease spreading across the neighborhood. I still remember standing at the end of my gravel driveway, HOA notice in hand, the morning sun just hitting the red paint on that old barn. It had been there since 1958, built by my father and grandfather with timber they milled themselves. To me, it wasn't an eyesore. It was a heartbeat, a reminder that something honest had existed here long before cul-de-sacs and solar-paneled rooftops. My name's Ethan Cole, 46 years old, civil engineer, single dad, the kind of guy who still sharpens his own mower blades. My 5 acres sit right on the edge of Willow Bend Estates, a place the realtor brochure calls a modern blend of rustic tranquility. Translation: cookie-cutter houses wrapped around what used to be family farms. When my parents passed, the land came to me. Taxes paid, survey done, title clean. The HOA formed 3 years later when the developers sold their last phase of homes, and they've been trying to swallow my property ever since. First, it was the fence, too tall. Then the mailbox, non-compliant design. But nothing lit their bonfire like that old barn. They said it violated community aesthetic harmony. I said it was on my parcel, outside their jurisdiction. They smiled like snakes pretending to nap in the sun. 2 months later, I was at my daughter's college orientation when my phone lit up with a string of calls from my neighbor, Tim. When I finally answered, all I heard was heavy machinery and a man yelling over the roar of diesel engines. "Ethan, they're tearing it down." I made the 3-hour drive back faster than I should have. The closer I got, the thicker the dust on the horizon. When I turned onto my road, I saw it. The barn half collapsed, the roof gone, 2 excavators chewing through what was left of the frame. Standing there, wearing an HOA badge like a sheriff's star, was Sandra Bloom, the president. Early 50s, perfect manicure, that look of casual superiority that comes free with too many committee meetings. "Mr. Cole," she called out as I jumped out of the truck, "we've had repeated complaints. The structure was deemed unsafe." "By who?" I shouted. She waved a clipboard. A safety inspector contracted through the board. "Show me the permit." She smiled. "You'll get the paperwork in the mail." I stared at the heap of wood and memory lying in my field, trying to breathe through the smell of gasoline and splintered pine. They didn't just knock down a building. They bulldozed a generation. That night, I sat on the tailgate, flashlight in one hand, coffee in the other, staring at the wreckage. Inside the debris, I found the old brass hinge my dad had polished every spring, still warm from the day's sun. That's when the switch flipped. I wasn't going to yell, or post online, or beg them to replace what they'd stolen. I was going to build something they couldn't ignore. Over the next week, I filed for copies of every document related to the HOA's construction permits. Most people don't read the fine print, but I design infrastructure for a living. I understand zoning maps the way a musician reads sheet music, and tucked inside the county archives, I found a detail they'd missed. The HOA's pride and joy, their brand new community clubhouse, the one with the fancy cedar facade and stone fireplace, sat squarely on a shared drainage easement. And that easement was maintained by the county's Public Works Division, which just happened to owe me a favor after I deconsulted on their flood control project last year. Sandra wanted to call my barn unsafe? Fine. Let's see how she feels when the county inspector calls her ballroom a public utility. I didn't sleep much that night. I drafted emails, reviewed diagrams, and by dawn, I had a plan that would make my father grin from whatever corner of heaven carpenters get assigned to. The next morning, the sun rose over an empty patch of earth where the barn used to stand, but for the first time since it happened, I wasn't staring at what I'd lost. I was looking at what came next. The following Monday, I walked into the county records office with a thermos of burnt coffee and a folder thick enough to make a lawyer nervous. The clerk behind the counter, Ron, a guy who'd been stamping documents longer than I'd been alive, looked up and said, "Morning, Ethan. They finally get you too?" "Yeah," I said, "and I'm about to return the favor." I slid the easement files across the counter. Ron adjusted his glasses, reading slow, then let out a low whistle. "You know what this means, right? If that clubhouse sits on a maintained easement, technically any county-approved modification can redefine its use." "Exactly," I said. and I've got a modification in mind. We filled out the paperwork. Temporary sanitation facilities for public use, the kind of bureaucratic phrase that hides a grin. When I left that office, the form had an official stamp, my signature, and a date 2 days out for inspection. Back home, I parked where the barn once stood. The ground still smelled of dust and diesel. I placed a single wooden stake into the dirt, just to mark the start of something new. That afternoon, Sandra drove by in her pearl-white SUV, window half down. "You should consider rebuilding something that fits the neighborhood this time," she called. I smiled. "Oh, I'm rebuilding, all right." She didn't like that answer. I could see her lips tighten before the window rolled up. 2 days later, the county truck pulled into the HOA parking lot. A man in a neon vest stepped out, clipboard in hand. Sandra was already waiting, heels clicking like gunshots on the pavement. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Ma'am, we're here for the site evaluation," he said. "For what?" He tapped his form. "Public facilities improvement. Authorization came through this morning." I watched from my truck across the street as her expression shifted from irritation to confusion to dawning panic. The inspector measured the lot lines, nodded, and made a few notes. When he left, Sandra pulled out her phone, probably to call every board member she had. By the weekend, the county had approved installation. 2 portable restroom units rolled in on a flatbed Monday morning, bright blue and impossible to miss, placed neatly beside the clubhouse entrance, right under the engraved sign that read, "Willow Bend Community Hall." I didn't have to lift a finger. The county handled everything: permits, placement, signage. The HOA's own maintenance fees covered the cost because technically they were enhancing access for public sanitation on shared infrastructure. Sandra confronted me that evening while I was stacking firewood. "This is outrageous," she snapped. "You turned our clubhouse into a toilet. I kept stacking logs." "No, ma'am, the county did. I just followed the rules." Her face went the color of boiled lobster. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but at least I'll have somewhere to wash my hands." Within a week, photos of the Willow Bend public restroom complex hit local Facebook groups. Joggers started stopping by. Delivery drivers used it during lunch breaks. Someone even left a 5-star Google review. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, of course, but sound carries well on quiet nights. Through my open window, I could hear them arguing about image damage, public nuisance, and potential deregistration. That's when I realized something bigger was happening. Their pride wasn't just bruised, their finances were cracking. Every day those restrooms stayed, the HOA had to pay for cleaning, utilities, and compliance. My revenge was costing them hundreds per week, legally. Still, I wasn't done. The barn was gone, but the foundation remained. Solid concrete, untouched beneath the rubble. And I knew exactly what I was going to build there. I woke up the next morning to find 3 HOA trucks parked across from my driveway, like vultures waiting for the carcass to stop twitching. Their president, Mrs. Carmichael, stood there in her pastel blazer, sunglasses reflecting the sunrise like she owned the damn thing. She didn't wave this time, just snapped a photo of my front gate and scribbled something in her little leather notebook. That was my cue. I stepped out, coffee in one hand, permit in the other. "Morning, folks," I said. "You're blocking a public road." Mrs. Carmichael smiled the kind of smile people use right before they stab you with paperwork. "We filed a new complaint, Mr. Whitaker. Your portable restrooms are a health violation." I handed her a copy of the county approval. "Funny thing, ma'am. The county inspector came by yesterday. Said your clubhouse plumbing doesn't meet code either. Something about improper drainage from the event hall." The way her jaw locked told me she already knew. By noon, I had 5 reporters standing on my lawn, filming the story of local man fights HOA with legal loophole. I didn't invite them. Word travels fast when people see power getting embarrassed. That afternoon, the clubhouse, now proudly labeled public restroom, was busier than it had been in years. Joggers stopped in. A construction crew used the sinks. Someone even taped a "thank you" Ethan note to the door. And that night, under a heavy moon, I stood on the cracked foundation where my barn used to be. The wind carried the smell of wet earth and diesel, but this time it didn't sting. It felt like the land was breathing again. I wasn't done. Not yet. The board had voted to rebuild a community garden on the far lot, but they didn't know that lot sat halfway across my boundary line. Their paperwork mistake was about to cost them more than a few angry headlines. I smiled, took a slow sip of coffee, and whispered, "Round 2. 3 days later, I got a certified letter with gold-embossed lettering that screamed importance but reeked of panic. "Cease and desist," it read, signed by the same law firm that once sent me a flyer offering HOA membership discounts. They were accusing me of public indecency by means of property misuse. Their clubhouse had officially become a public restroom, and it was working too well. I drove down that morning just to see for myself. Cars lined the street. A delivery driver was washing his hands in the sink. 2 teenagers were taking selfies in front of the sign. Mrs. Carmichael stood off to the side, red-faced, talking into her phone. "This is a disaster, Harold. The optics are terrible. He's turning the neighborhood into a circus." I leaned against my truck and called out, "Need a towel rack installed, ma'am. I've got spare parts." Her head whipped around, but before she could spit her usual venom, a white county sedan pulled up. Out stepped Inspector Alvarez, clipboard in hand, same guy who signed my permit. "Afternoon, folks," he said. "Just doing a follow-up. Heard there's been some plumbing concerns." He took a long look around, the crowd, the signage, the freshly mopped floors, then glanced at me with a half smile. "Everything's up to code here. In fact, cleaner than most gas stations I've seen." Mrs. Carmichael nearly choked on her outrage. "This is private property," she hissed. Alvarez pointed at the boundary map I'd given him last week. "Not quite. Clubhouse sits 12 feet into Mr. Whitaker's parcel. Been that way since the original survey error in 1998. Funny thing about landlines, they done it a move just because you put up a fence." For the first time, Mrs. Carmichael didn't have an answer. She just stood there, jaw tight, clutching her phone like it could reverse time. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That night, my inbox exploded with interview requests. Some blog called me the Restroom Rebel. A late-night host even joked about turning every HOA clubhouse into a pay-per-use toilet chain. But behind the laughter, there was something real. People were tired of being bullied by their own neighborhoods. And maybe, just maybe, I'd given them a way to fight back. When the HOA board called an emergency meeting the next morning, I went. Sat right in the front row wearing my work boots, sipping my gas station coffee. Mrs. Carmichael read from a statement, voice trembling. "Effective immediately, the Ridgeline Estates Homeowners Association will be resigning its charter pending legal review." Silence filled the room. Then I stood up, nodded once, and said, "Good. Now if you'll excuse me, I've got a restroom to clean." 2 weeks passed before the noise finally died down. Reporters moved on, internet jokes faded, and the clubhouse restroom, my masterpiece of petty engineering, was officially decommissioned. I didn't gloat. Not out loud, anyway. Instead, I spent my mornings out by the barn site, rebuilding what they'd taken. My old red barn was gone, replaced by a concrete slab and the smell of fresh lumber. I'd kept the same dimensions, same slope of roofline, but this one had something extra. A small bronze plaque on the front door that read, "For every man who cleaned up someone else's mess." One afternoon, while sanding a beam, a car door slammed behind me. It was Mrs. Carmichael. No makeup, no pearls, no army of board members, just a woman holding a manila envelope with trembling hands. "I came to apologize," she said quietly. "We overstepped. The others quit. I'm selling my house." I looked at her for a long moment. "You ever build anything with your own hands, Margaret?" She shook her head. "Then you wouldn't understand what it's like to watch someone destroy it." She nodded once, left the envelope on my workbench, and drove away. Inside was a check. $12,000. Exactly what she'd fined me the day they tore the barn down. I didn't cash it. I framed it. By winter, the new barn stood tall, sunlight bouncing off its fresh red paint. Inside, I hung photos of my father and grandfather, both smiling in the faded glow of time. I poured a little whiskey, leaned against a post, and whispered, "We did it, boys." Sometimes I still drive past the old clubhouse. The HOA sign is gone, grass overgrown, windows dark, just a relic of arrogance left to rot. But every now and then, someone stops me in town, a stranger, a farmer, a young couple, and says, "Hey, you're the guy who beat the HOA, right?" I smile. "No," I tell them, "I'm the guy who reminded them who owned the land. And every time it rains, I swear the wind carries the faintest smell of pine, diesel, and sweet hard-earned freedom." What would you do if an HOA tore down something your family built with their own hands? Would you fight back in court, rebuild in silence, or turn their monument of power into the world's most poetic restroom? Drop your state below. I want to see where my land rights family is watching from tonight. My name's Jack Lawson, farmer, son, builder, and proud owner of exactly 0 HOA memberships. And if there's one thing I learned through all this, it's that you can't regulate pride, you can't find tradition, and you sure as hell can't bulldoze legacy. Because sometimes justice doesn't wear a suit or carry a gavel, sometimes it just flushes twice. New stories every day, real fights, real revenge, and real people standing their ground. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, and remember, never mess with the guy who knows where the water main is buried.